So, this week inside the Lords, although I am standing outside Church House, but that is in the heart of Westminster, it's actually where the bishops from the House of Lords are officially based, but it's also a public venue and big excitement. We've just had a Battle of Ideas salon event planning this year's Battle of Ideas Festival, 9th and 10th of October. We're going to do a people's takeover of Westminster, and we hope that we're going to be in Church House, which is a very exciting venue, and we hope, keep your fingers crossed. Okay, what's happened inside the Lords this week? This week has been where each day there's been a day dedicated to discussing the Queen's speech. You had to choose which day you spoke on, which bills you wanted to address. It's not a formal discussion on the bills. People keep saying to me, has the Academic Freedom Bill passed yet? No. We haven't got to the point where any of those bills have even gone through the Commons, let alone come to the Lords. But it gave an opportunity for me to explain why I had such great reservations about the online safety bill that I mentioned last week, but also the ban on protests, and also to say that whilst I welcome the attacks, I welcome the government's attempt to use the law to say that academic freedom is important. Despite that, there's real problems with that bill, and I'm going to be looking at it very carefully. But just to kind of absolutely make clear, and do look at my speech, this week, a teacher training student who dared to take on Manchester Met, all he did was email the head of department and say, I want to support the Batley teacher who's been suspended, and it's disgraceful the education unions didn't support him, and would you support me, showing a cartoon of Muhammad in a lesson on religious toleration. And they basically said, come for a disciplinary meeting. I mean, how frightening is that? So those kind of issues are going to be happening all the time. Those people who are most opposed to the idea that cancel culture even exists, at the moment, Birkbeck College, they're trying to get Eric Kaufman, who's behind the bill, sacked. So with no irony whatsoever, there's no such thing as cancel culture, but sack the man who's supporting the government having a bill against cancel culture. I mean, couldn't make it up. The other and the most important thing I wanted to say to you about Inside the Lords was I actually had to leave a bit earlier than usual tonight, and I left a full-blown discussion on whether the Lords should open up. It was about what they call the hybrid house. The hybrid house is where you have half Zoom, half online. All the voting is done through technology, and only 30 people allowed in the chamber. They've changed the rules on the inside the chamber today so that it's 1 metre social distancing, so they allow 56 members inside the chamber, and actually there was 56 people there, so it was kind of the busiest I'd ever seen it. But they then kind of rather punitively said, you can sit 1 metre away from each other, but you have to wear your masks throughout in the chamber. And I couldn't believe it, because some of those debates are 9 hours long, right? And I sat there for 5 hours today. The great news is, when I walked in, half the people had masks on. By the end, hardly anyone had their masks on in the chamber. They just kind of took them off, really. And apart from the Lib Dems, I have to say. The other good piece of news, though, was that in the discussion about whether the House of Lords, which after all is part of Parliament, I mean, I keep forgetting, and despite my reservations about its lack of democracy, they kept saying we're parliamentarians, and 3/4 of the people who spoke said we need to be back to normal. They made the point that at the moment the House of Lords is not working properly in terms of scrutinising the government. They made a brilliant case for spontaneity. Lots of buses. They made a great case for spontaneity and for the cut and thrust of debate. And I want to say something in humility here. I have slagged off lots of things about the House of Lords, but there was some fantastic speeches today from people who stood up and actually made me think, my God, these people do understand what at least a debate should be like. They do understand or feel a sense of duty in the House of Lords for holding the government to account. They weren't complacent. They basically said, we have not been working up to par. It is not right that debate has been stultified and sterilised in this way. We cannot in any way expect the country to go back to work on the 20th of June and we kind of dawdle in and don't bother, right? And so I thought I had a great deal more admiration for them. Don't worry, I've not changed my position on the House of Lords, but I think it's important to know. But it's also important for us now as citizens, now me not in the Lords, that the mood has changed. That actually people are saying we've got to get back to normal, that we have to learn to live with this virus. And I think that's a hugely important shift in mood. My final point is that from last Monday, certainly in England and bits of difference in Scotland and Wales, you could go back to a lot of the things that have opened up, like you can go to the pub, you can go to restaurants. And a lot of people have gone to I've just talked to people who went to the theatre last night, it's really lovely. But there's not a rush, is there, if we're really honest? And I think there's a real hesitancy in the public. So it's all the more reason why the people involved in politics would actually say, right, we're going to take a lead. People are a bit anxious, a bit nervous, not necessarily rushing out, kind of going on the tube but then going home after work. All the more reason that we do our damnedest to reconstitute the public square, and that anyone who's involved in politics has got an absolute duty and responsibility to give a lead on that and stop the scaremongering around variants, around all the restrictions there are, and just get out there and start living life as it needs to be lived, because democracy will die on the vine unless it's got a public, and the public needs to reconstitute itself. So that's what I'll be arguing in the Lords next week as well. See you then.